The Kingdom of Benin, also known as the Edo Empire, was a kingdom located in the southwestern region of what is now Nigeria, lasting for at least 600 years under the Oba Dynasty, and around 1,000 more if we count the previous Ogiso Dynasty. Benin was one of the longest-lasting states in West Africa. Home to a capital city which awed visitors, a system of earthworks rivaling the Great Wall of China in length, and some of Africa's most famous works of art, this kingdom is an underappreciated gem of world history. This video is part of South of the Sahara, a collaboration between history YouTubers dedicated to highlighting the underdiscussed history of Sub-Saharan Africa. If this is your first introduction to the collaboration, be sure to check the description below for a link to the full playlist, where you'll find coverage of topics ranging from the Kingdom of Congo to the history of Judaism in Ethiopia. The Kingdom of Benin has its origins in antiquity, first as a confederation of towns and villages, and then as a kingdom known as Igodo, ruled by monarchs known as Ogisos, or Sky Kings, from around the 1st century BCE. The Ogiso era is a bit like the pre-classical period of ancient Greece, where mythology and fact blend together, and legendary heroes are discussed alongside historical kings. Even toward the end of this period, we have some seemingly mythologized elements, with tales of heroes slaying man-eating beasts. It's only around the 12th century, give or take about a century, depending on the estimate, that Benin begins to transition out of the semi-mythical age, followed by the legendary foundations of the Oba Dynasty. It was also during this period that we find the origins for both of the kingdom's popular names, Benin and Edo. So although there's a high degree of continuity between the Ogiso and Oba dynasties, we can consider the break between them to mark the end of Igodo and the start of Benin. According to the founding legend of the Kingdom of Benin, the Ogiso dynasty ended with a poor king, Owodo, who was exiled after he killed a pregnant woman, a crime considered so dire as to negate royal authority. Owodo's only heir had previously been forced into exile due to a series of circumstances I don't have the time to get into. But the important thing is that, with no available heir to take over as Ogiso, the dynasty ended. In its place, a popular elder was elected head of state, and he ruled without issue for some time. However, when he tried to install his son as his successor, it was met with resistance from the rest of the ruling council of elders. Instead, they reached out to the Yoruba king Oduduwa in the city of Ile-Ife to come lead them. Why exactly they did this isn't fully clear. According to some versions of the story, Oduduwa was actually the exiled son of Owodo, and he was approached to essentially restore the Ogiso dynasty. However, Yoruba accounts firmly disagree with the claim that Oduduwa, considered a founding father of the Yoruba people, was of non-Yoruba origin. Instead, they claim that Oduduwa was simply approached as a respected, militarily powerful ally of Igodo, who had defended them from invasion in the past. It might have been a situation a bit like the ascension of Ryorek in the Kievan Rus, where a confederation of Slavic princedoms invited a foreign warrior to rule over them, knowing that internal rivalries would cause issues if they chose one of their own. In any case, Oduduwa refused the offer himself. Instead, he sent his youngest son, Oromyan, in his place. Oromyan moved into a palace built for him in Usama, and lived there for several years, marrying the daughter of a local noble and having a son. However, throughout this period, his foreign style of governance met with stiff opposition from local nobles. Oromyan eventually became frustrated with the resistance. He declared Igodo to be the land of vexation, or Ile Ibinu. This phrase would be adapted into Ubinu as a name for the land, and particularly its capital city. Oromyan renounced his title, arguing that only a child born of local soil and raised in local customs could rule over the land. As such, he installed his native-born son as king in his place, and returned to Yoruba land himself, from which he would go on to found the Oyo Empire, another major state in what would become Nigeria. Oromyan's son, who is now known as Eweka, would be raised in Benin by a native mother and native attendants, and could thus be taken as fully belonging to the country. However, he still had a Yoruba father from the great city of Ile-Ife, something which set him apart from his subjects, and aspects of this unique identity would be emphasized throughout the history of Benin, as a way of framing the monarch as exceptional. This would form the basis of Benin's dynastic myth, the story which justified the right of their monarchs to rule. Eweka ushered in the beginning of the Oba Era, Benin's second monarchical system. In many ways, the Obas represented a return to the norms of the Ogiso era. They retained much of the same symbolism, and styled themselves as semi-divine figures, much like their precursors. Additionally, like with the Ogisos, power is not totally centralized. The Oba sat at the head of the kingdom and held near absolute authority, but everyday governance largely fell to local hereditary nobles. These nobles and the Oba fell into a sort of symbiotic relationship. The Oba's ultimate, semi-divine authority meant that his approval granted legitimacy to the authority of the nobles, and the nobles managed the tasks of administering his realm and collecting tribute on his behalf. The nobles also held some collective authority through their council, the Uzama, which was able to check the Oba's power. Additionally, when the Oba died, the Uzama claimed the right to appoint a successor from amongst his sons. Through these privileges, the Uzama was able to wield significant power within the kingdom, sometimes putting them in an antagonistic relationship with the Obas. This situation changed in the 15th century with the ascension of the Oba Aware. Aware had been born as Prince Ogun, third-born son of the Oba Ohen. The decades before his rule saw a great deal of strife between the Uzama and the royal house. First, Oba Ohen was deposed and stoned to death by the Uzama after ordering the execution of a high-ranking noble, with his oldest son, Ogbeka, replacing him. However, Oba Obeka also struggled against the Uzama, fighting multiple civil wars against them. Prince Ogun and his younger brother were both exiled, while another brother, Orobiru, succeeded Ogbeka as Oba. After Orobiru died, Ogun's younger brother left his exile to take the throne, and Ogun returned to Ubinu to replace him by force. There's a lot of legend surrounding this event which I won't get into, but one thing I will note is that Ogun was at one point aided by a slave named Edo, who he would later rename the capital after, giving both the Edo Empire and the Edo people that name. Anyway, in 1440, after a difficult struggle that saw much of the city burned down, Ogun claimed the throne, and took on the regnal name Aware, meaning the trouble has ceased, to commemorate his victory. He then took steps to prevent something similar from happening in the future. He stripped the Uzama of their power to appoint Obas, instead introducing a firm system of primogeniture, where the oldest son of the Oba would always replace him. As part of this, he also introduced a new title for eldest sons, Edaiken, as well as the policy of placing these sons in charge of a town to foster their governance skills. He also introduced two new administrative orders, the Erabo Nore and the Erabo Nogbe, made up of officials appointed by and answerable to the Oba alone, who could aid in some of the tasks otherwise assigned to hereditary nobles. With the power of the Oba consolidated, Aware would go on to do something that earned him the moniker Aware the Great. It was under Aware that the Kingdom of Benin truly became an empire. Under previous monarchs, the kingdom had been a city-state, consisting of the capital city and a collection of surrounding villages. Similar to other city-states like those of the Greeks, it existed within a broader cultural cluster, in this case that of the Edo people, but included only one subsection of this broader group. Aware expanded Benin's authority to the surrounding regions, bringing in other Edo and non-Edo groups, and pushing the borders of the empire to the coast. The empire would roughly double in size once more under Aware's son, Ozoluwa the Conqueror, who ruled from about 1480 to 1504. The empire would peak in size under Oba Orhogbua, who captured what is now Lagos. Though the core of the empire was Edo, Edo culture was not imposed upon acquired territories, making the empire culturally and linguistically diverse. This linguistic diversity also resulted in the name of the capital city, Ubinu, gradually morphing into Bini, as speakers of different languages coalesced in the city and blended their interpretations of the name. This is the name that would eventually become Benin, and the city is often called Benin City to distinguish it from the kingdom. Aware is also credited with building the inner wall of Benin City, part of a network of barriers called Iya in Edo, and collectively known as the Walls of Benin in English. Despite this name, the Walls of Benin aren't walls in the standard sense, but earthworks, deep moats paired with artificial hills made from the removed soil, running parallel to the ditches. Within the moats, vegetation was allowed to grow, creating an additional barrier to crossing. From the bottoms of the ditches to the tops of the moats, these earthworks could be as tall as 25 feet in the longer outer walls and 50 feet along the inner wall. At 15 meters long, and up to 50 feet tall from the bottom of the ditch to the top of the moat, the inner walls built under Aware would have needed an estimated 5,000 workers working 10 hours each day to finish their ditches within a single 97-day dry season. And that's not counting the time needed to clear land and transport and deposit the soil into heaps. These inner walls make up only a small portion of the Iya as a whole, however. The outer walls are shorter, up to about 25 feet from ditch to peak, but stretch across a much longer length, at approximately 16,000 kilometers long. This makes the Great Walls of Benin one of the largest man-made structures on Earth, only about 5 kilometers shorter than the Great Wall of China, and made with dozens of times the material of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The outer walls are traditionally considered defensive fortifications, as the inner wall was, and attributed to the 13th century Oba Ugula. However, some evidence suggests an earlier or more decentralized origin for these Iya, possibly with a different intention in mind. For more information, I'd recommend checking out Hidden History's video about the Walls of Benin, linked above. The three things the Kingdom of Benin is probably best known for are its Iya, its capital city, and its artwork. We've already discussed the Iya, but there's a lot more to say about those other two subjects. Europeans began establishing trade relationships with the kingdom in the late 15th century, starting with the Portuguese, who were followed by others such as the English and Dutch through the 16th and 17th centuries. Benin was a major early point of contact in West Africa for Europeans, and they even named the surrounding bight for the empire. Side note, the modern-day Republic of Benin takes its name from this bight, hence why there's a country completely distinct from the Kingdom of Benin which shares its name. Many of these visitors were awed by the splendor of Benin City, which they often called Great Benin. One Portuguese source from 1691 describes the city thusly: Great Benin, where the king resides, is larger than Lisbon. All the streets run straight and far as the eye can see. The houses are large, especially that of the king, which is richly decorated and has fine columns. The city is wealthy and industrious. It is so well governed that theft is unknown, and the people live in such security that they have no doors to their houses. A Dutch source from 1668 gives some further details about the organization and architecture of the city. Houses are built alongside the streets in good order, the one close to the other. Adorned with gables and steps, they are usually broad with long galleries inside, especially so in the case of the houses of the nobility, and divided into many rooms, which are separated by walls made of red clay, very well erected. The source adds that these walls were kept as shiny and smooth by washing and rubbing as any wall in Holland can be made with chalk, and they are like mirrors. The upper stories are made of the same sort of clay. Moreover, every house is provided with a well for the supply of fresh water. This source further gives us a description of the royal palace. The king's court is square and located in the right-hand side of the city, as one enters it through the gate of Gotten. It is about the same size as the city of Haarlem, and entirely surrounded by a special wall, comparable to the one which encircles the town. It is divided into many magnificent palaces, houses and apartments of the courtiers, and comprises beautiful and long squares with galleries, about as large as the Exchange in Amsterdam. The buildings are of different sizes, however, resting on wooden pillars from top to bottom lined with copper casts, on which pictures of their war exploits and battles are engraved. All of them are being very well maintained. Most of the buildings within this court are covered with palm leaves instead of square planks, and every roof is adorned with a small spiraled tower, on which cast copper birds are standing, being very artfully sculpted and lifelike with their wings spread. The ending of that quote brings us to the other thing Benin is best known for, its art. Brass casting was a skill first refined in Ile-Ife, where it was used to create lifelike busts of important figures. These techniques probably spread to Benin in the 13th century, but local craftsmen adapted them to their own style. While in Ile-Ife, brass casts were typically depicted with more naturalistic facial features, in Benin, faces were typically depicted in a much more stylized way. Additionally, Benin pioneered cast brass reliefs, the plaques now frequently called the Benin bronzes. These plaques, as described above, decorated the walls of the royal palace and depicted the history and exploit of the Obas. Other art in Benin included cast brass figures of animals such as leopards, a species heavily associated with the Obas, who kept tamed leopards as part of their retinue and claimed the sole right to kill leopards within the kingdom. Across the city, towers were also topped with large casts of birds, as described earlier, and long slithering brass snakes ran down the tiled roofs of these towers. In addition to brass casts, Benin was known for wood and ivory carving. In some cases, entire elephant tusks would be covered in carved images. These would often be placed at altars to past Obas, mounted in stands made in the likenesses of the Obas whose spirits were believed to reside within them. In other cases, ivory was carved into valuable bracelets or armbands. Pendant masks were another type of ivory carving, represented here by a particularly famous example representing a queen mother, possibly Queen Iria. In this particular example, you can see representations of bearded Portuguese men woven into her hair, showing how these foreign traders were incorporated into the symbology of the Benin kingdom. It reminds me a bit of Moor's head symbolism in many European countries, which similarly used the exotified image of travelers from a far-off land as a respectable symbol. Unfortunately, much of what we've discussed here either no longer exists or has been scattered far from Benin City. Benin declined in power through the 19th century, though they remained a significant trading destination. By the 1880s, the British, who had gradually established control over much of the surrounding territory in today's Nigeria, became sick of the Oba's protectionist control over trade. While the Oba resisted efforts to make Benin a British protectorate, in 1892 they successfully convinced he and some of his officials to sign a treaty expanding British influence over the empire. Several years later, the British got into a direct conflict with Benin. In 1897, a British delegation attempted to enter Benin City, but their request was denied as a festival was going on at the time. Even so, the delegation continued toward Benin City. Believing that the true intention of the delegation was to stage an invasion and replace the Oba, several generals launched a preemptive attack on them, slaughtering most of the British representatives. The British launched an actual 1,200-man strong invasion of Benin City in response, labeled the Punitive Expedition. They successfully captured the city, and proceeded to loot its treasures and burn the city to the ground. Some of the artwork was given to the British Museum, where it remains today, while the majority was sold off to various buyers. Today this art remains scattered across the world, from North America to Indonesia. Very little remains in the hands of the Edo people. Benin City would be rebuilt, but not in its original style. Today, few traces remain of the spectacular city which once stood on the site. To avoid ending on a sour note, however, let's mention some good news. For one, the Kingdom of Benin was never actually dissolved, and while it is now part of Nigeria rather than an independent nation, it still exists in Edo State, where Obas still rule. Even better news, while the artwork of Benin remains scattered across the world, growing public pressure has resulted in some positive steps towards repatriation, with several museums returning or announcing plans to return artifacts looted from Benin to Nigeria within the last few years. While much of the looted art remains on display or in private hands where it may be difficult to retrieve, some progress has been made towards returning what was stolen, which includes not only artwork that will bring value to Nigeria, but also spiritually significant pieces from altars. Moreover, the more Benin bronzes are returned to a single place, the more we'll be able to reassemble them into their original context as a chronicle of Edo history, an exciting prospect for historians. The Kingdom of Benin remains a fascinating historical state, from its ancient foundations shrouded in myth, to its rise as an empire. As one of the oldest states in West Africa, there's a lot about Benin that I had to leave out of this video for time. If you'd like me to make more videos going into the history of Benin, from the Ogiso era to the several civil wars it experienced, and the story of Queen Idia and her son, let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, but more importantly, please share it around. That's the best thing you can do to help get more eyes on a small channel like mine. Don't forget to check out the South of the Sahara playlist in the description, and I'll see you next time.